We seem to have a nice full house. We can go ahead and start. Welcome everyone to the second webinar in a series of monthly webinars that Explain is putting together for AI in practice. And we're delighted to have such a nice representation of the community. For those of you who are new to Explain, we are a startup in stealth mode. We will be officially launching in private beta in July, and then we'll release our product and be available for the general public in September. In the meantime, what I can say about us is that we are a place where members can build, test, connect with other members of the community, buy or sell AI. And we were founded by Hassan Sawaf, who has quite a history in the AI community. He's been working in the field for over 20 years, and he's headed up teams at eBay, Amazon, and Facebook in the AI community, and hopefully he'll be joining us soon if he hasn't already done so. And delighted to have with us Franz Pitzer, who's with deepc and will introduce himself shortly. Thank you for joining us. We're looking forward to your conversation. And then from the Explain side, we've got Kamer Yuksel, who is our head scientist, chief scientist, or architect, sorry. I'll be moderating a little bit of the talk. My name is Rama Shakaki, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Explain. And we've got members of our team, and we look forward to your engagement. So if you want to use the chat window to post any questions, or if you'd like to raise your hand if you have a question, that would be wonderful. What we'd like to do today is start with an introduction from Franz, led by an introduction from Kamer, and then they'll start talking about the topic, and then we'll open up later for Q&A. And with that, Franz, I'll turn it over to you if you would like to go ahead and start the conversation and introduce us to a little bit about your background as well. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Rama. And thank you so much, Kamer, for hosting this session and inviting me to that session. It's a great pleasure to be here tonight. So I will introduce myself a little bit. My name is Franz. I'm originally a medical doctor by training, got my training in Munich at LMU and in Boston in the US. Then turned back to Munich, worked a couple of years in the hospital as a physician, treating Parkinson's and stroke patients in the area of neurology. Then at some point, inspired by research, I shifted completely my focus to AI, pursued additional masters in the area of data science. And for the last couple of years, I've been working at this intersection of medicine and AI. And I'm very pleased to be here tonight. We are having a great conversation and discussion about some very interesting and recent topics that we have encountered also at our work at deepc, where I serve as the CEO and one of the 4 co-founders with deepc, which is our company. We are building an AI platform which connects medical institutions like hospitals or medical imaging centers in the area of radiology and innovative AI companies that are having introduced medical device products into the market already. And we're serving as this connected piece, and all together as partners, we are bringing AI into clinical routine. So I think this is it from my side. I will hand over to Kamer to say a few words about himself, and then we will open the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Franz. Hello, my name is Kamer. I'm working as a principal AI architect at Explain. And I've been working in the AI domain for more than 15 years. And my involvement with health AI domain started very early. I studied in Bernstein Center of Computational Neuroscience. And during my PhD, I worked in a healthcare AI project of European 7th framework. And then actually me and Franz worked together in a startup where I was acting as a chief data scientist and he was the chief medicine officer before he started deepc, or meanwhile he started deepc. Yeah, and I'm looking forward for the discussion. So today we will mainly discuss around the robustness and generalizability of AI solutions in healthcare AI domain, and our discussion will go around an article which has been recently published about this subject. So I would like to start by a question to Franz. So in the article, there has been an interesting figure which states only 1/3 of the hospitals and imaging centers report using any type of AI to aid their tasks associated with patient care imaging or business operations. Since that the title of the article is AI overpromises but underdelivers in healthcare, do you really think that AI has a long way before doctors can trust with our lives? And or do you see any practical and beneficial applications of AI in healthcare which are present today?
Yeah, thanks for this introduction, Kamer, and thanks for the question. Hopefully you're familiar with the article, otherwise maybe we can share it in the chat later. I think those questions are very important to ask. I think from my experience, especially in Germany, I think the 1/3 would be something that we would find quite desirable, but we are not even there yet. I guess it's even lower, this number. However, I think the applications are out there today. So we see obviously a lot of applications in the area of radiology because that's our domain with deepc. So medical imaging AI is a pretty obvious use case area because you already have the training data and labels available in a digital format, which is not something that you can expect in any vertical of healthcare. But that makes radiology very suitable as a vertical within healthcare for any AI use cases. So companies have been around for a couple of years now, and there have been many medical AI solutions also being certified by the notified bodies, the regulatory authorities, and be cleared for use in clinical practice. Primarily, we see in radiology AI a couple of different types of use cases, which we in deepc cluster in different groups. So on a very high level, there are reporting use cases which really support the workflow. And those use cases primarily analyze images, primarily using supervised machine learning, mostly deep learning, CNNs, etc. as a technology. And the purpose of those algorithms is, on the one hand, prioritization of urgent cases. For example, to identify intracranial hemorrhage early. And this can be very beneficial for patients in order to increase their safety, to come up with earlier diagnoses, and potentially even save their lives by initiating treatment and therapy early. On the other hand, those clinical AI applications can help with avoiding overlooking of critical findings, like fractures, for example. They might not be urgent, but they are often overlooked in X-ray images. So that's a second area where we see already applications today. There are a couple of companies out there, like our partners Gleamer or AZMed from France, that are serving those use cases. And then there is a third category of quantification use cases to basically run segmentation algorithms on specific organs, for example, in MRI brain exams, to identify certain volumes of brain regions. And this is a really cool use case, again, because this is a task that humans are not really capable of performing by themselves in a reasonable amount of time. And then we see, so this is one cluster of use cases that all feed into the reporting routine, into interpretation of images, and either speed up the workflow, increase patient safety, or have other benefits. A novel use case area, and this is heavily driven by a pioneer from the US, a company called Subtle Medical, is a use case area that supports the image acquisition process by using also deep learning methods. And the idea here is that in MRI or CT imaging, you could use faster imaging protocols. Obviously, you would sacrifice imaging quality, but those startups are using those noisy images, applying AI algorithms to those noisy images to create the high resolution images, which you would usually take more time to acquire those images, or even more radiation dosage in the area of CT. So to sum up and answer your question, Kamer, I think there are already a lot of practical and also beneficial applications of AI in healthcare. I gave a couple of examples from the radiology domain. Obviously, there are other domains like drug discovery, for example, or chronic disease management, digital biomarkers, etc., which I haven't highlighted here. I hope this gives you a kind of overview. And I think I would like to ask you a question referring also to this article. There is one of the leading deep learning researchers, which we all know, it's Geoff Hinton. And Geoffrey Hinton actually had a very famous quote, which now turns more and more infamous, and he's quoted more and more. He said in 2016 and stated in 2016, we should stop training radiologists now. It's just completely obvious within 5 years, deep learning is gonna do much better than radiologists are. And the question is, we are now 5 years later in the year 2021. Obviously, we aren't there yet. Nobody has stopped training radiologists, and I think for good reasons. And I'm asking you, Kamer, are we there yet technologically? Handing over to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, my opinion on this statement is that I would probably, if I could go 5 years back and would advise Geoff Hinton to like change his code, I would basically rephrase it in this way. So we should start training radiologists to work with AI, and it's completely obvious within 5 years, radiologists empowered by deep learning is going to do better than radiologists now. So I think that we should change our perspective. I think the aim should rather be basically improving the current workflow of radiologists or doctors instead of trying to replacing them. And also like AI applications in healthcare are not just limited to the hospital environment, where you would try to like reduce the workload or replace a professional. But I believe the biggest opportunity of AI applications in healthcare is actually at home with chronic disease management, for example, which requires continuous monitoring at home. And if we have such continuous monitoring systems, that could also help patients help patients and doctors to raise, for example, suspicions for early diagnosis of certain diseases.
Very, very interesting answer. Thanks for sharing your perspective, Kamer. I will add to that. On the one hand, I completely share your opinion on like those other use case areas that are really beneficial in terms of opening up completely new opportunities for how care is going to be delivered and how we might be able in the future to do personalized treatment and personalized diagnostics of patients at home using wearable technologies in combination with AI, but also in the hospital. I think you're completely right. It's gonna be a combination of AI and physicians And the whole trend in the industry is going towards that direction as well. There have been recent publications on that topic again, and what I've observed over the last couple of years, like whereas it was 5 years ago more debate regarding AI versus physicians, now it's shifting completely towards AI plus physicians as a team. And I find this quite interesting because I think the skill sets of humans and AI is quite complementary. If you look at it from like a information technology point of view, AI really is good to find patterns, at least as of today, and doing so without getting tired. Doing that at 5 a.m. in the morning, a doctor might not be, but a doctor might be very good at interpreting specific findings that AI might spot and adding knowledge to it, putting it into perspective, and using meta information to come up with a more precise diagnosis. So I think it's very unfortunate that Geoffrey Hinton made that statement 5 years ago, but on the other hand, we have a lot to discuss, and looking back, I think there have been many more achievements by Geoff Hinton he would be rather become famous with, but I think this quote will stick for a while with him. So I will go to the next area, which we would like to shed some light on. In the article, it's quoted that only half of the FDA cleared AI algorithms are utilized by 1/3 of radiologists. And of those not using it, more than 70% do not plan to adopt AI in the near-term future. So I think I would like to discuss with you, Kamer, the major bottlenecks for the AI adoption by radiologists and hospitals. And maybe you can start with like shedding some light on that question from a technical perspective. And then I will continue sharing some very practical insights where we see the main roadblocks. Over to you.
For sure. Thank you. So, I mean, the article actually focuses on inconsistency part of AI technologies, but I would like to start by like other blockers I see for adoption. I think adoption of any AI technology is not just related with the performance of that technology, but also with, for example, I think there's a lack of research in investigating human AI interaction or user experience when it comes to such tools. Basically, for us, like downloading a data set and running experiments on it is an easy process. But when you would like to validate an experiment or a thesis for a model in its collaborative use with a professional, with an expert, basically that's much harder process. And I believe that to basically increase the adoption, we should start by enabling the integration of AI technologies to the existing workflow of such professionals rather than completely changing them. And another important thing about adoption, I believe, is basically placing an AI model as a decision support mechanism in the current workflow, which is only possible with better explainability or interpretability capabilities of AI models. So here, so the current explainability methods for deep learning models are, for example, are centered in for example, visualization, the activations of the model in a given input. I think those are good for example, debugging models, but I don't think those are sufficient to really explain why a deep learning model or why a model which is seen as a black box gives a decision. In my previous experiences, I found human extracted features or human understandable features to be much more convenient for explaining AI decisions. And for example, in a like previous case that I work in fintech domain, where we were required to explain decisions of a sophisticated deep learning model. We actually have done that by rather training a second model with deep learning models decisions, and then using human extracted features to explain them by visualizing their Shapley values. So I think it's still an open research area, and we should come up with better methods for on the explainability side. And also, I think that for a better adoption, we should communicate the AI capabilities in a clear and transparent way, so that we don't fall in this trap that where we like overpromise with our technologies, but they basically under-delivers and lose the trust of their users. And also measuring and correctly indicating about model uncertainties is very important, I believe, so that the users of our technologies know when to rely on the AI model and when to not trust and make their own decisions.
Those are very, very valuable insights, Kamer. And I think I can just continue from a practical standpoint, adding some of those roadblocks. I think one big topic, which I actually myself don't like to describe as a problem, because I'm a big advocate of data privacy, is data privacy. I think the roadblock arises more or less from the insecurity of interpretation of data privacy principles and how we can incorporate them into everyday workflows. The GDPR, for example, which is applicable here in Europe, gives very clear borders, like how we could design systems in a way such that we could enable closed loop technology, for example, also leveraging data that has been acquired during a deployment setup. I think what we really need to work on is like sustainable and also transparent data privacy frameworks to make data usage in the clinical routine, but also secondary usage to improve models and monitor the performance in real time to make this a reality. And I think eventually this will also, from a legal perspective, always include the patient. Who should consent to the usage, especially the secondary usage of their data for further AI research to cover more use case areas in the future, et cetera, et cetera. And I think many stakeholders need to be involved in that discussion to better understand each other's perspective. A second area which I see as a kind of roadblock is integration into existing infrastructures. We see at deepc that there are some standards in radiology like DICOM and HL7 interfaces, but still you would often not be able to integrate AI results into the workflow in a meaningful way without building like a separate system, which really destroys and disrupts the user experience. So I think there needs to be a lot of work done in that regard of integration, which is twofold, as I just explained. One is like a technical integration into existing systems, but also like a workflow integration to have a really smooth user experience. And I think a last point, which I would like to mention, I could actually go on forever, like talking about roadblocks, but we also want to be a little bit constructive here in that session and find solutions. But one thing that I would like to highlight is education. I think that many doctors specifically are not really well prepared for this new era of technology, which will be data and AI driven. And this is really a pity, in my opinion, because we should integrate technology and education into medical school, but also into other disciplines to really prepare the physicians and also other medical workers of the future for the future, but do this today. And I'm primarily talking about like basic knowledge of how those technologies work to really build that trustful and trustworthy relationship with those technology advances. So let's go to the next area. I think we have covered a lot of interesting topics that might be a roadblock or challenge that should be addressed. So the article also claims the main reason in the author's experience or opinion for the lack of adoption by radiologists. And they claim that it's the inconsistent performance of AI algorithms. So how do you think this can be tackled or improved? And where do you see the main reasons behind? So you can start maybe sharing your opinion, and then I will again add to this.
Yes, of course. So when we think of inconsistency, we can understand two different things. So one could be like inconsistency with the reported validation performance by clinical studies. And the second reason of inconsistency could be inconsistent performance across different subjects or samples or different, let's say, devices. Or images captured by different devices, and I believe the main reason for such inconsistencies is basically the limitations when it comes to the availability of high quality training data with enough variability from different patient cohorts, from different sites, and so on. Basically, we all know the difficulty of collecting and labeling data, as well as the cost of it, and it's never possible to collect the data that reflects all real-world settings. So when we encounter basically a data from an out-of-distribution data which doesn't reflect the data that the model is trained or validated with, it's normal that for us to basically encounter performances which are not reflected by clinical studies. But of course, there are like many ways or methods to tackle that situation. And like one of such ways is basically improving the label quality to cope with subjective and noisy labels in the data set. So recent studies show that the more you can basically reduce such noisy labels in your data set, you would need the less amounts of data for a generalizable solution. And apart from that, I think we should also like try to develop continuous data collection and active learning strategies for labeling and collecting data in production. So like to sum up, I think the first solution to this problem is trying to improve the data collection and labeling strategies and increasing the data variability as much as possible, so that we can to reduce our likelihood of encountering an out of distribution samples. And the second reason is, I believe, insufficient testing. So basically, I'm reviewing actually lots of papers in healthcare domain from ML for Health conference and some other journals, and I have seen a low adoption of proper validation metrics and schemes by AI researchers who are working in this domain. And also when again, when you like collaborate with doctors, you see that there's a lack of common understanding in those metrics for correctly managing the expectations of them. And apart from that, I think that the current loss functions that we are using for training our models are not always perfect to ensure worst-case robustness and clinical suitability of learned solutions. I see that gradient-free optimization methods, the application of gradient-free optimization methods, for example, can be very useful of tackling such limitations posed by being constrained on differential loss functions that we commonly use now. And apart from that, I think before such deployment in an hospital workflow, it may be important to make an on-site validation of model performance at the background of their existing workflow, and allowing them to review and label maybe mispredictions from AI models so that that information can be used for fine-tuning models. Mm-hmm. So, Franz, I would also like to pose you a question. Yep. Do you also encounter any lack of trust for AI models in the industry, like at least for Germany? What is the perception of health professionals about AI? How do you transparently communicate the AI model performance to hospitals? And how do you manage their expectations about your AI offerings?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Kamer. First of all, I would like to thank you for this great answer to the last question, which I would like to add a couple of points and then continue with those questions. I couldn't agree more with you that it's really proper training and testing that's also really matching with our experience at deepc. So obviously, as a platform, we have really deeply thought about those questions because they have real business impact for us, as we're like the ones deploying AI models and medical devices into the clinical workflows. I think one major misconception here is that the regulatory proof points like CE mark, FDA approval go hand in hand with generalizability. And this is generally not true, at least I can speak for Europe. It's not even the duty or job of the notified bodies to test those models. And I think many people are inferring that from a CE mark product that it would generalize it across any site. So what we do as a platform is a multifaceted strategy. So we thought about what could we do today and what could we do tomorrow to help the ecosystem that face those challenges, obviously, overcome those challenges. And I think we have established a quite solid method or approach how to deal with those challenges. Today, we are limited a little bit in our abilities to address the full picture. So we are really focusing on testing those devices. And I think both for testing and training, it's really important to look at the design of your data sets. People are always talking about how much data they used for training their models. That's great, like using 500,000, 1 million exams. But from a data scientist's perspective, that's not too relevant, I would say. It's much more important to cover the whole spectrum of the target population. And you need to do that in both settings, in the training and the testing setting. And for the testing that we are running at deepc, it's like a multi-stage testing. So first, it's looking at testing that we are getting provided by from the vendors. Then obviously we're running independent testing on in-house designed data sets. And then before we are deploying a solution to a customer, we are running it offline on customer data sets, but then also do it in a real world setting with a research use only license for the first couple of weeks with those customers. What we want to do in the future on top of that is real-time monitoring of the performance. Obviously, we need to overcome a couple of challenges that we have mentioned before. And I think the answer to this question that you asked me is going hand in hand with those points that I just raised. So I think building trust for AI models is a continuous process. It's is a very multifaceted process. We need to look into transparency, which goes into the areas of data privacy. I think we also had a contributor from the audience who highlighted that privacy is a major concern in Germany, which I can confirm. This is true with the question, which I try to answer in a minute. So I think building this transparency is building trust. But also having first proof points of model performance and real world data sets also helps us build those build those trust in the industry. And talking about Germany, I think there is a great perception of AI because you see as a physician the benefits more and more that AI can bring to your workflows. I mentioned some of those before. We are super transparently communicating the model performance with the hospitals. We are even partnering with them, as I just explained, to figure out the generalizability of those model components on their specific data sets and scanner requirements. And by having them as a kind of partner in that process, we are also building trust. And this, at the same point, manages obviously the expectations. And we're going on a journey together. This is also one of our key mottos, which is outstanding together with the AI partners, but also with the clinical partners, and going on that journey together and building the ecosystem together. I hope that answers your question, Kamer, and I would like to reflect a little bit on the question from Martin Riemer, who asked if there is any other place in the world that is frequently using AI on patient data. I think to be super frank, I think we are all at the very beginning. It's not only a German thing. I think in Germany, one of the main roadblocks may be data privacy and the lack of knowledge in terms of cloud usage, which goes hand in hand with AI, I would say. But in other areas, in other countries, there might be other problems. So it might be as trivial as internet bandwidth connection, for example, or accessibility to such devices. And therefore, I think we are at the very beginning of that journey, and we could work all together on a really collaborative and partnership-oriented mindset to go on this journey together. And yeah, I hope this answers your question. Partly, I think you're raising your hand, Martin, so I will just hand over to you. Maybe you want to comment, share your thoughts, have another question. I would be very delighted to get your opinion on that.
Yes, I'm lecturing mainly, so I'm not in research, but I follow research very closely, and I've been in research in radiology, 3D imaging, and so on until about 10, 15 years ago. I don't know whether you know, it's a German app called ADA, which does a patient interview, and it comes up and it's training with the interview going on and on and on. And in the end, it comes up as you have a 10% chance of disease A, 50% chance of disease B, and so on. And it's pretty good. But that's only the entry point into hospital. Once you're in hospital, you need a large amount of data. And some states like Denmark or UK have a complete database of all their patients, and they could do research on what I was dreaming of, that in the end, you have a little thing sitting on your shoulder, which is AI, and it gives you a hint when you do something wrong or when you're going in the wrong direction. That's to explain my question a bit more in detail.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think ADA is actually a really good example, and also your thirst for open databases for AI research and development is really valid. I think we have to go a little bit further in Germany. Here we see a lot of good examples from other countries, like the UK. Like we have initiatives like the UK Biobank, for example, or countries that you mentioned, like Estonia or Israel, where all those like advances are possible today. But I think in Germany, we still have some challenges to overcome in this regard. And I think in general, this is a journey where we also need to include the patient and really educate patients regarding the benefits that they can enjoy by getting access to such tools. I mean, this can really be a lifesaver, as you say, Martin, having someone sitting on your shoulder like a digital twin or something like that. We all know those fantasies of the future of healthcare, but seriously, like this could be a game changer for many individuals, and taking the patient to the center of that whole journey makes a lot of sense. So I would like to go back to this article and focus on a very interesting quote from Andy Ng, which I really like. He was one of my entry points for to AI many years ago. And he says that it turns out that when you take an AI model that is showing comparable performance to radiologists on a test set to an older hospital down the street with an older machine, and the technician uses a slightly different imaging protocol, this data drift that is caused by those circumstances may cause a performance of AI system to degrade significantly. So in contrast, any human radiologist can walk down the street to the older hospital and do just fine. I really like that quote because I think it really nicely illustrates the challenges that we are still facing with AI and the level of, I would say, smartness or intelligence we have reached at this point in time. So question to you, Kamer, what's your opinion and take on that in terms of reproducibility and other matters?
Mm-hmm. I believe that we already talked a little bit about out of distribution robustness or generalization, and
yes.
the role of like data variability or like covering every real world settings in that manner. Thus, I would like to use the chance to focus more in reliability issues of AI models in this question. So, like for almost all AI researchers, basically, it is known that deep learning models are highly sensitive to simple input data perturbations. And I think this is a very relevant problem with what Andrew NG stated. Basically, I can agree that let's say we have an image and we just change certain pixels in image, and that causes an AI model to totally give a different decision. So like how we can trust an AI model in such case to basically apply it in such a critical application as in healthcare. So I mean, if the image is slightly rotated, for example, it could give another prediction. But this is at the same time an active research area. So there are many research which tries to tackle or tries to improve the adversarial robustness of AI models by, for example, using generative adversarial models to generate adversarial perturbations, which would efficiently increase that robustness during training. And of course, like typical methods we apply for data augmentation, which is basically a method to improve our data variability, are still valid. And we also see a trend of not just expert-defined data augmentation policies, but as I said, also generating such augmented data using AI technology. And apart from that, one problem is that only a minor percent of whole data available during training or after the deployment of model is unfortunately labeled. Basically, if we can better leverage the unlabeled data, that would improve the out of distribution robustness, enhance the reliability of our models, and therefore like semi-supervised learning methods available such as virtual adversarial training and other methods, are very important, in my opinion, to increase the amount of data we can leverage for training in a better sense. Finally, when we talk about reproducibility, one problem is also the continual learning or fine-tuning or even retraining of models. So, for example, when you have a model which works perfectly when trained and validated with certain data sets, when you add more data to it, you may encounter that the model actually, instead of increasing its performance, it results in it degrades its performance, or it's basically converged to another solution which doesn't fully reflect the previous performance of the model. So the model with the new data may obtain, for example, different biases across the population that existed in your data, and that may not anymore be suitable with the current site that you are working with. So, and for that reason, basically, the reproducibility in terms of to enable continual learning or retraining, in my opinion, is also a critical subject. And there needs to be like mechanisms to automatically check and validate for different problems that may happen in those processes. So, Franz, I would also like to pose you a question. I know that with deepc operating system, you are onboarding many such third-party algorithms and AI models to your platform. I would like to ask, how do you, in practice, make sure that those models are working in real world? And what are your internal validation steps before onboarding those models and during and after production?
Mm-hmm. It's a very good question, and I partly touched it before already, like how our processes look like. As I said, like our AI, as an AI platform vendor, we obviously have never been involved in the training steps, and I really see the design of data sets in training, but also in testing, as a really crucial step to make sure that AI models generalize well and are robust for new sites. In order to overcome that situation, because we cannot change like what has been done in the past, and it's kind of black box for us, we're really focusing at the moment on testing, and we're having a multi-stage testing procedure. As I said, it's like testing on independent, well-designed data sets that we hold in-house, and then also testing on customer data, which is like an individual test, which is also has also several phases, like first an in-lab test, and then also like a real-world test. So I think this is really important to make sure that doctors can eventually trust AI, because the situation which we would like to avoid really is that doctors start relying on AI and really incorporating AI results into their workflow. And then we see like a drop in performance, and the negative results, like false negatives or false positives, would actually really have an adverse effect on the AI. On the usage of AI, and also adverse effect on the clinical outcomes. So in order to look into the future and what we could do in the future, we're currently building up system components that would allow us to monitor AI performance in real time, which obviously includes user feedback and includes the patient by giving the consent, allowing us to do so. But we truly believe that getting involved into that feedback loop is something that is crucial for us as a platform to ensure patient safety and reliability of those models. So I hope that answers your question. I think we have a couple of minutes left. We have some more quotes from the article. I think the next one we have touched somehow. It's about the large majority of FDA-cleared algorithms that have not been validated across a large number of sites, raising the possibility that patient and equipment bias could lead to the inconsistent performance. I think this is a behavior that we are observing right now. What we really need to work on as a community is to introduce new governance, novel governance, and also regulation of AI in healthcare, which goes beyond just the authority and responsibility of regulatory bodies. I think we as a community of AI researchers, clinicians, economic institutions like SMEs or also large corporates, we really need to sit together and create guidelines that we all commit to and want to follow. I think this will be a first step to create transparency in that area and also to ensure patient safety and model reliability. And obviously, we need to also address data privacy concerns to enable that disclosing of the loop and enable like a real-time monitoring, and also leveraging data for secondary purposes like monitoring or training of new use cases. So in my opinion, we need to also sit together here to create data privacy frameworks to be able to get access to data to make sure that we can facilitate those requirements. I think there's another question from the audience. Also, Martin is raising his hand. Maybe, Kamer, you had some time to look at the question already. And want to share your opinion. So I think it's from Miktat. I hope I pronounce your name correctly. Question is about once the technology has evolved well enough to be reliable in those fields, do we think that the transition would be some sort of leap of faith or a form of slow adaptation whereby time human involvement will become less and AI involvement will be more until we reach almost full autonomy? Maybe Kamer, you have some 2 sentences or so. I can share also some opinion. We have 5 minutes left, so I would like to also go to other questions. Yeah. So let's be quick on this.
I will take that question. So Franz, first of all, thank you for such valuable responses and comments. They have been all very valuable. And I believe on the regulation and data privacy side, maybe it would be helpful to make another webinar because this one wasn't sufficient enough to discuss all of those topics at once. So coming to Miktat's question, so I believe that the adaptation should be slowly and iteratively. As I said, I'm a defender of not trying to replace someone at the first day, but rather basically slowly and iteratively finding ways to improve their efficiencies, improve their work efficiencies. So that's my opinion, and I think that would be much more beneficial and helpful. Not just allowing more easier adoption by them, but also to basically find about and resolve such challenges that we encounter, such as reproducibility or robustness, reliability. So those challenges, maybe all of them was not fully perceived 5 years ago. We should understand that deep learning and its application in industries is actually very new, and it requires some evolution itself. So that's why, my opinion is we should take one step at a time.
And to add to this, just 2 comments, from a practical experience. I think there is a general belief that doctors are in general highly in fear of getting replaced by AI. When we are talking to doctors, we are often getting the feedback that they're really involved in a lot of routine tasks that doctors find not very intellectual, not very demanding, and where they would actually love to get replaced by AI systems. For example, recently I was talking to a radiology colleague, and he was sharing his opinion. Like, he was like, I'm looking at 200 mammograms per day. If like AI could sort out like a significant part of it, and I could just focus on the really difficult cases, that would really not only relieve me and my work burden, but also would really like benefit the patient directly, because I could spend like really more time with those critical cases that are more difficult to interpret. And I think taking this into the equation is a really important point, but I agree with you. I think it's going to be slow adoption, and it should be slow adoption, and it should always be considered as a team AI together with physicians. So we have 2 minutes left. I would like to hand over again to Martin Riemer, who raised his hand, and yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to share your vision of an all-knowing AI system, which is really good at it, but from cars, as it was said, like Tesla discovering that a container was the color of the sky, and they went right through it and crashed the car. One of the things. And so I think for freak decisions, an eye is always good so far. Not for standard things like mammography or other X-ray exams, which are routine. That is pretty good with an eye. But I would rather tell people AI in the near future will only be a trainee with you. You are training the AI as much as it trains you, which gives a more sort of equal share of responsibility, not just the AI. And then eventually, maybe when I'm fully retired, then we have AI which is as good as a medical doctor. But I can see lots of days, months, years, decades maybe passing before we have reached that state.
Thanks for sharing this valuable comment, Martin. Absolutely agreed. So this goes hand in hand with the team up thoughts that I shared. Kamer, you want to have some closing remarks? Because I think
I would like to add one last point on that. So I certainly agree with you that we should maybe start diverging our focus from using AI only for treatments, but we should think about how we can improve the workflows in the hospitals. For example, as far as I know, when deepc started, it didn't start as a treatment tool or decision tool for radiologists, but it rather started by prioritizing cases for radiologists to improve their workflow, or to basically save lives by better prioritizing the queue of medical images that radiologists should analyze. And to do that, I believe we need much more professionals like Franz, who understands both worlds well enough to find out such cases which we can tackle.
Thank you, Franz. Thank you, Kamer, for your contributions. This was delightful and definitely very informative. I look forward to the next discussion, and thanks to everybody who participated. Please join us next month for a follow-up. We might have it for this industry. We might pick another topic and then bring you back after the summer for an additional healthcare discussion. And we will follow up with a summary of the call in the coming few days. Thanks again to everyone. Franz, Kamer.
Awesome.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Kamer. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Ciao.
Thank you. Have a nice evening.
Thank you.